What is up, guys? Chick Kackis here, and we are getting a puppy in 2 days.
It's gonna be so cute.
Thank you so much for stopping by, and today
We have got a full fire team, all 6 people, using the brand new Season of Dawn exotic quest weapon, the Devil's Ruin Sidearm, and we're taking it through the entirety of the Garden of Salvation Shadowkeep raid and ranking its performance on every encounter. How does this weapon truly fare in the endgame? Let's find out. But just before we do, guys, 72-hour sale on right now for Advanced GG. If you use my code KackisHD, check it out. Fantastic product. I use it all the time. Little secret here, MTash and Mr. Fruit have their own amazing flavors. If you get their stuff and use my code, we both benefit. That's a win-win-win. I've never heard of such a thing. All right, now let's get started by taking a look at the Devil's Ruin. It's got 2 perks intrinsically: close the gap, variable trigger, press and release to fire individual shots, hold to charge up a high-powered staggering laser, strong against unstoppable champions. Now this is combined with another unique perk here with Pyrogenesis. Fully charging, the laser refills the magazine from reserves. So as long as it has 1 round of the magazine, you can then hold it and it's going to do all 15 rounds in that charged laser. Now let's start out here with the very first encounter of the Garden of Salvation, kind of the opening encounter. Here you definitely have quite a lot of adds to kill, including some champions. However, unfortunately, they are overload champions. I kind of wish they were unstoppable because this thing absolutely schmelts unstoppable champions, like it's insane. But these are overloads, but even then, this thing is actually putting out enough damage to deal with them pretty swiftly. The other enemies that you really need to take control of are going to be the yellow Bar Minotaurs and the yellow Bar Cyclopses. Against both of those, it's actually quite good. This will nearly kill a Cyclops in 1 single burst. That's pretty significant. In fact, on the last part of this encounter, where you're running through a field of dozens of Cyclopses, the entire team kind of said, all right, everyone only use Devil's Ruin, and we did. And we killed them no problem. Like, we were taking down Cyclopses left and right with this thing. The power is really there. Essentially, this is capable of fulfilling a role of a special weapon, but utilizing the abundance of ammo of a primary, and therefore, in this encounter, I've got to give it an 8 out of 10. It does everything you want it to do. So it is time to move on from there to the second encounter of Garden, and here we are defending the Conflux. Now, unlike the previous encounter where you're kind of mainly focused on taking down certain yellow bar enemies, here, aside from the Angelics, which you are very concerned about, you are mostly using it to defend against kind of large groups of red bar ads. So it actually, against those guys, performs just fine. You're normally going to have like a few goblins and then you will have a Minotaur. Now it's kind of perfect how this weapon functions because you can use the normal shots to take out most of the goblins, and then you're going to have, 2 to 3 rounds left in the magazine. Well, do that Pyrogenesis charged shot and deal with the Minotaur. Like, it actually is almost purpose-built for killing these groups of spawning enemies. And it's really in this encounter where you feel the benefits of this being a primary weapon, because this encounter does go on for a decent amount of time. All 4 different Conflux locations are going to need to spawn angelic enemies, and you'll have a few waves in between there as well. So you are just going to be fighting and killing for a long period of time. You're going to have to use a lot of ammo, and if you do rely on something like a heavy, like a special, I've often ran out of ammo with my Izanagi in this encounter. I've ran out of ammo with my grenade launchers in this encounter. So having this primary, that's quite beneficial actually. Now, when you do have those angelic spawn, it does again put forth a decent amount of damage. However, there is a somewhat significant downside, and that is it gets out this pretty significant amount of damage over a kind of long-ish period of time, if you did have a sniper rifle or a shotgun, the shot is pretty much instant. The time you press the trigger and the damage going on the enemy is instantaneous. However, with this, you can start shooting when you see the crit of that Hydra, half the damage is going to go there, and then that shield is going to rotate around, and then you can have the, second half or last third of this burst miss and go into the shield and get immune numbers. Like, it kind of takes a decent amount of time for this weapon to get all its damage out, and with the Hydras specifically, because of those rotating shields, it can be somewhat annoying to set up. So I thought I would mention that. Otherwise, still a very good performing weapon, but it's not necessarily doing anything absolutely out of the ordinary here. And because there's so many more red bars and you don't really need this thing for red bars, I'm going to give it here a 7 out of 10. Alright, now it's time to move on to the next encounter of this raid, and this time we got a boss fight. There is a whole damage phase. How will this thing perform against the Consecrated Mind? Well, to get to the damage phase, there is a pretty considerable amount of ad killing going on. And as you can see, as normal, similar to the other two encounters, this weapon is great. We've already talked about how it functions pretty darn well against mages, so when you are fighting the Minotaurs specifically that drop the motes, it's pretty good against them. However, kind of like similar story to the Hydras, this weapon, because it takes a while to get off its damage, you get a downside with the Minotaurs as well, because they will disappear. They teleport and then report in, I guess whatever you'd say, a little bit closer to you. So you'll start shooting, and the second you start shooting your burst of damage, they disappear and then they reappear pretty much as you're done shooting. So that can be pretty frustrating, like fusion rifles, and this is kind of fusion rifle-ish, have never really been good against Minotaurs that teleport for that reason. So that's a downside, but there's definitely more normal red bars than those Minotaurs, and against those guys, it's great. But let's talk about that damage phase. And here, okay, you're putting out a lot of damage. We took this through Last Wish, and it was one phasing bosses. What can it do against a Consecrated Mind? Oh my gosh, he ran away. Like, this boy yeets in like 2 seconds. This boss is gone, dude. Usain bolting out of here. And we are running to keep up. Like, we are constantly moving to keep up. And this damage phase is not meant for a sidearm. Yes, it's crazy. This thing shoots like a fusion rifle, but it's still a sidearm, and that means it doesn't have the best range, and you can kind of see us doing a lot of damage and then not very much damage as we're struggling to constantly be shooting and be committing damage to this boss, but also trying to catch up to it. So the end result was pretty pathetic. We were only able to do about a fourth of his health, and there you go. In this encounter, although it's good leading up to the boss fight itself, it really suffers, and so I'm going to give it a 5.5 out of 10. It is just barely above average. Maybe you could justify using it if you're using really good, like, legendary snipers, but the Izanagi's Burden is so much better. No, we did actually end up killing the boss with the ruin just to send a message, but moving on from there, we have the final encounter of Garden of Salvation, this time against the Sanctified Mind. And this is a pretty complicated one. You have so much stuff going on. You do have another boss fight, and this boss fight and these mechanics are very strange. Some weapons excel in this part and they're phenomenal, like sniper rifles. Some weapons that are normally good for DPS just suffer massively, especially since you are using often mods that increase damage when you are near the confluxes. And that is absolutely the main strategy when it comes to DPSing. Everyone meet up around a conflux with as much of those mods as you can put on and then damage the boss. But we've already talked about how this is a sidearm and the range does suffer. So can this thing actually perform half decently when it comes to this damage phase? Well, as you can see, yeah, better than I honestly expected. We did around 1/3 of this boss's health, And that's pretty significant. That's pretty much what you were doing with the challenge modifiers on day 1, to be honest. In fact, we were so impressed, we continued with this encounter and did another damage phase with the Devil's Ruin. We didn't quite do as much, getting him just below 1/2 of health, but I think it is possible to kill this boss completely with the Devil's Ruin. And again, for a primary, that is something special. That is actually pretty significant. Not to mention that this thing is coming in handy for the rest of the non-boss damage parts of the encounter. We've talked about how good it is at killing adds, and it's not surprisingly just as good in this encounter. However, with all of that being said, truthfully, although this is impressive for a primary, you don't really want to be using a primary when it comes to boss DPS. You are much better off using an Izanagi's Burden, potentially some of the other options. The Trophy Hunter now too is an alternative, but still, this thing is impressive for a primary. I keep saying that, but that isn't good enough, and there are much better options out there. Unfortunately, the best option being the Izanagi's Burden is a huge detriment because you can't use this and it at the same time. So, with all things considered, I've got to give it a 6 out of 10 in this encounter, certainly above average, nowhere near top tier. But that's going to conclude all the different encounters, so it's time for an overall rating. This is turning out to be one of, if not the best PvE exotic primary in the game. It rivals the damage and ad clearing potential of the other arguable top slots, like the Outbreak Perfected. So this is something you should seriously look at if you can utilize legendaries for the parts where this doesn't quite cut it, so for the boss damage phases. And overall, that means for this raid, I've got to give it a 7 out of 10. Excels in the first 2 encounters, suffers in the last 2. But guys, that is going to be it for the video. Hope you enjoyed, found this interesting. If you did, please remember to help me out by simply rating and especially sharing this video. If you guys want to see more Destiny 2 content similar to this, don't be afraid to slap that subscribe button. If you want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter at RickKackis. That's linked in the description down below. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.